presentation for a while to talk about these elite Norwegian American soldiers, and we realized that both of us have, a nice personal connection with either one of those two units. Ralph has a connection with the 99th, and I have a connection with the OSS Special Forces Group. And it's a story that hasn't been told for a while, and there's been some books that have come out and more books coming out. So we'll see how it goes here. No, oh, here we go. I'm good. Oh, it's up. It's in there. It's not up here.
Sorry. Hand something up.
Jules.
Find the down arrow.
Is it going on there? Is that why? I see it.
Yeah.
Takes a navy, man.
You gotta scroll to the right screen. Yep.
Here we go. So I'll be talking about both the units, and when we finish talking about the 99th, Ralph will get his personal connection, and I'll weave my personal connection in with the OSS units as we go along. So the 99th Infantry Battalion, called the Viking Battalion, it's separate, and I've got a slide that explains what that means, but the Defense Department wanted to form units based on culture and language, the most famous of which is the Japanese unit, which went to Europe, and it's the most decorated unit in World War II. I think the 422nd, I believe. And so the Norwegian unit was part of that group, and so it's called separate. And that means that it wasn't attached to any particular division, and it was associated with the 1st Division, 1st Army Division, but it basically functioned somewhat autonomously. I was activated in August 15th, 1942. It consisted only of Norwegians and Americans with direct Norwegian descent. It originally was set up for a possible invasion of Norway. The planners were looking at how can we get to Germany, and the idea was, well, if we can come through Norway, you've got a population that would tremendously support an invading force, and then all you have to do is sweep through Denmark, and boom, you're right there. You don't have to slog through Europe. So there was an idea that was going to happen. That changed, of course, and they were transitioned to combat action here in France, Belgium, and Germany. And then when the war was over, they disarmed German occupation. Of course, they ended up being the honor guard for the king when he returned from England. And Ralph has a cousin from North Dakota that was a member of the 99th. Now, the OSS Norwegian Special Operations Group, called NORSO, is really not known at all, really. They were the 99th was training at Camp Hale in Colorado. I'll give you more detail. But this is kind of an overview. So the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, was the forerunner of CIA. Heard about all these special forces trained men. Admittedly, it's went to warfare, so they flew out to Camp Hale and signed up 80 enlisted and 12 officers that would become a core of the OSS. And it was originally to be part, again, of the invasion of Norway, but then when that changed, they changed to conducting clandestine operations behind the lines in France. And then there was one operation in 1945, just before the war ended, in Norway itself, and that's a very famous one. My connection is my best friend, his name is John Grunza. His dad, Ryder John Grunza, was one of the original officers selected for this unit, and saw action in France, and I'll tell you his story. So The infantry battalion separate is the Viking battalion. You can see their badge, which at the Viking ship there. The original intention was to transfer many voluntary Norwegian nationals who become the immigration process. And so, in one of the books, the 99th Battalion estimates that first generation Norwegian immigrants may have constituted about 50% of the original force. A little bit of controversy about this, and I'll explain this next slide. That would give about 500 men, a total of 1,000 altogether. What happened was the author had an informal survey, and it was 1979, and only 152 responded. So it wasn't called what you would call a thorough review. So this is from the book, and in that survey, you can see that birthplace among the American-born, and then battalion Norwegian ties. So about 40% were born in Norway of the respondents to the survey. 57% were born in the United States, born elsewhere. Ralph and I questioned, well, and like writer John Grunset, the person I'm going to talk, he was born in Norway. He came over when he was 5. So this statistic doesn't tell us how many were born in Norway and then were in the United States at the time. 64% had Norwegian parents, 23 grandparents, and so these are relatively newly arrived immigrants. The battalion Norwegian ties, again, born in Norway, and so forth. So parents and grandparents, 90% had parents and grandparents who were Norwegian. So in October, the battalion of 1,000 men were formed and arrived in Fort Snelling, which is right outside Minneapolis. They decided that if they're going to do winter warfare, they can't wait around for snow in Minnesota. They didn't have any snow this year. So they went out to Colorado and Camp Hale. It's about 9,238 feet. It's near Leadville, Colorado, which is about 11,000 feet. And it's near some famous ski places, Breckenridge and Copper Mountain and so forth. So it was tough. And they had high altitude, mountainous terrain, thick snow, and the training was demanding. The pack that they carried, including the skis, was about 90 pounds. And they lugged that pack around during all their drills. When the melt occurred, they did extensive rock climbing. And so here you see a group of Camp Hale trainees, and they've got their skis. This is a picture of the pack, and it was so heavy they couldn't stand upright. They had to lean over. And you can imagine 90 pounds, and you're trucking through 6 feet of snow. Incredibly demanding. So these men were not only special forces trained, but they were really fit. And that's what motivated the OSS to come out and take a look at them. In September 1943, now they know they were going to head to Europe, so they shipped out from New York to Scotland. They did some further conditioning and specific training for European war in England, and then they were participated in D-Day. They landed on Omaha Beach, and then when they moved into France, they participated in the Battle of Cherbourg. The most important engagement that the 99th had was in the Battle of the Bulge, and I'll talk a little bit about that. They entrapped armies in Aachen, Germany, which is inside Germany, and the Battle of Bulge, as we'll find out, was the Germans pushed all the way into Belgium, so they had to go back, reroute through Aachen, and pick up and try and contain the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans. Now, their important function was there's a small town in Belgium, and there was a special operation by a notorious Waffen-SS commander, Otto Skorzny, and he had a Panzer tank division. As you know, Panzer tanks were quite lethal. So this is two pictures of the Battle of Bulge, and here's Germany and here's Belgium. And so Hitler wanted to push through Belgium and then get to Antwerp, which was a port. And the idea was if they could push through and then get to Antwerp, then that would break the Allied supply lines and then change the tide of the war. So you can see that here's here's the action for the 99th right here. You can see they're sort of on the northern edge of this bulge. And as it turns out, this was not very well protected. And so their presence there turned out to be really vital. You can see this is the first army here. This is Patton and his third army here. And you can see he's got this pretty well covered. If you remember the Battle of Bastogne, the commander that said nuts when the Germans wanted to surrender, that's right here. So here's Malmedy, and this is where the 99th is, waiting for this famous Otto guy to try and push through with his Panzer division. So I've got there are many sources that have men talking about the events that were happening to them. And this is First Lieutenant Raymond Helly. And he was talking about a textbook battle. And here's the Lieutenant Colonel Otto Skorzny. And he had about 4,000 men. He wasn't too sure that he figured he was probably outnumbered, and he was. But the important thing was that the 99th Battalion was reinforcing the American line. They had some anti-tank guns, and they also had a tank destroyer battalion. They're ready for the Panzers. So they thought they were in good defensive position. So this is what he wrote. Who would win? Only time would tell. It became a waiting game. So that's typical war, 99 minutes of wait and 1 minute of pure hell. So here's his comment after the battle. The 99th distinguished itself as the first combat unit to arrive in the defensive sector. And for 30 days, they had repeated attacks by the Panzer units of this famous Waffen SS colonel. And he said, what decided the outcome? I'd have to say time, 30, 40 seconds. And this is these small bursts of energy that occur in war where it's just, everything happens and then it stops, and then it starts again. So a prompt and efficient way of defense sprang into action made the difference. The 99th had no intention of letting Germans push them out of their foxholes. So his comment was, Lieutenant Colonel rode the bulge with 4,000 soldiers, selected from the 1st SS Battalion, which is the prime unit in SS Waffen units, and he went back with about 700 thoroughly defeated men. He came at us with the best, but they were not good enough. And it's really stirring to hear a personal comment about this particularly the question before the battle, who's going to win? And it's a wonderful description. Well, with the surrender of Germany, the regiment went on a mission into Norway, and it was they basically were there to disarm the Germans as they surrendered. The important thing was they arrived in Oslo to serve as the honor guard to the Norwegian king on his arrival, and then they were an honor guard in the parade in his honor in Trondheim. So here's the king arriving. Here's the 99th waiting at the dock, landing for the king. He came off on a ferry, and he's in a car when he offloaded onto the dock, and so the 99th is waiting for him. Here's the parade for the king in Oslo. So everyone in the 99th got this certificate, and it's a liberation of Norway, 8th May 1945. They got this person's name, and this is a tremendously valuable piece of paper, I think. So how about some summary? Any questions about the action so far, the description? So they participated in this game, obviously Normandy, northern France, Rhineland, remember they entrapped Germans in Aachen, and of course the battle in Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, and then as they're moving to the end of the war, they're in Central Europe, and then they ended up in Norway. 101 days in combat, 52 killed. They had 207 wounded, and a lot of the 207 wounded were wounded multiple times. I just wanted to show you some of you don't know the ranking of the medals, and of course you all heard about the Medal of Honor. The next Medal of Valor is the Distinguished Service Cross or the Navy Cross. The next one is the Silver Star, and then the Bronze Star. These are all medals for heroism or valor. And then obviously we know what a Purple Heart is. So the 99th Infantry had 15 Silver Stars, 20 Bronze Stars, 305 Purple Hearts, so they had 207 wounded and 305 Purple Hearts. And believe me, not everybody who wounded would accept a Purple Heart. And it's a remarkable, I happen to experience that myself with some of my men. I really, this is a mystery to me how they had 763 good conduct medals. What's wrong with these people? I guess they didn't get back in civilization very much. And of course, combat infantry. So it's an amazing record that they can certainly be proud of. There's a couple books I want to mention. I'll turn it over to Ralph. This is one of the original books with lots of pictures, and it's a really terrific resource. This is where that informal survey came from. This is a newer one produced by Vesterheim, and it contributes because it has a little more detail about the specific battles. So, Ralph, you want to talk about your cousin?
Sergeant Jelliberg there was one of the famous Jelliberg boys from Battalion, North Dakota. He was one of 4 Jellibergs that were in World War II. One of them had good sense, was in the Navy. This guy is in the Army. I have never met this Jelliberg. I've met his mother, but I never met him. But we heard about the Jellibergs every day growing up. Some of the interesting things, well, he was down in Texas, I believe, and he found out that they had this group forming up in Minnesota, and he thought, well, it's closer to home and it's pretty hot in Texas, so let me go back. And he could ski, so he went back, and a lot of people joined because it was miserable wherever they were. They thought they would, but that training that you saw there, I saw some pictures of it earlier today, and they were slogging through snow. I wouldn't believe that anybody could go through it, and you can't breathe, the air is so thin. One of the cute stories I saw in there was these guys they hit the beach in Germany, and they were in there, and they all got this report or this order from headquarters: do not speak Norwegian when you're in Europe. And like this one guy says, why the hell should we pay attention to this stuff? So he's in a foxhole, and he's talking Norwegian to the guy next to him, and all of a sudden they could hear people on the other side, and he said, we could hear they were going to start attacking us because they thought we were Germans. So he said, you want me out? We stood up and swore in English as loud as we could so they would know we were from. But they were a rather interesting group. They did go from France to Oslo. They offloaded in Oslo. And as you saw, they disarmed about 40,000 Germans, I believe it was. So that was their main job besides being the honor guard for the king. There is some, for all of us who have been in any kind of a headquarters, you always know that there's rivalry. Everybody wants to be the stars and whatever. And anyway, without trying to say anything bad about our British comrades, they thought Norway was British. And if you all recall, they were getting ready to invade Norway to protect the protect Norway from Germans, but the Germans beat them. So when the 99th, or these OSS guys, by this time they're part of the OSS, they were gonna do these parachute drops into Norway, and the Brits high command was not giving them any airplanes. And it took Winston Churchill to take a run over and say, give them the airplanes. So they did. I really can't tell you much more about this man Gellerberg, but they all were volunteers. Nobody was directed to do this. And they came from all walks, but there was certainly a heavy percentage of guys coming from the Midwest, because that's where all the immigrants were landing, was out there in Wisconsin and North Dakota, Minnesota. So that's all I can tell you about
Was he
Mr.
injured,
Gellerberg.
or did you hear anything about any,
Oh, pardon me?
was he injured, or did he?
No, he was not, he was not. But I wanted to tell you, yeah. I thought I saw where they landed the second day in Normandy. My uncle, Joe Gleason, he also landed on the second day, but he was 20 minutes, and he was spent the next 9 months in England getting him. He left. But he went all the way through without getting wounded, and as you can see, there was a lot of folks that did get wounded.
Wow, thanks, Rob. So that's quite a story, and I'm really, it just makes you really proud to know that these men stepped forward and they did what they thought was best, and they behaved. They were wonderful soldiers. No surprise, I guess. Huh?
Mike,
Yeah.
were this group around Nova Scotia?
No.
No.
No?
Mike, I did have one thing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Here's a letter that he wrote. What you're thinking of is Camp Norway,
Yes,
and Camp Norway was Norwegian citizens.
yes. I
There was,
go up there this summer.
yeah, we were there once, it was a great place. The US High Command decided that they were not going to train foreign soldiers on US land, which would change that by now, but that's what happened there. So that's why they formed it, but they had, as Mike mentioned, they had the Japanese battalion, they had a Greek battalion, and there was a Polish one that never got going. But here is a letter that he wrote, and it's a little difficult for me to read, but he says, since arriving here in Norway, I've received several letters asking me to tell me what it's like here in Norway. And I can't read it, but I'll tell you what it says. It says basically, he found that the people were quite well dressed, except for shoes. Nobody had shoes. He said they were wearing paper shoes, and they lasted about 2 weeks. The food that they were eating, they all looked like they were healthy, but they ate a lot of fish. They had no coffee to speak of, and no tobacco, which I guess was good. And they were very pleased that they got these packages from the Swedish and the U.S. Was that
Citizens.
no? What do you the group, the first aid group that handles
Red Cross.
Red Cross. They were very good about that. Actually, when I was stationed in Norway, went out and I talked to some of these people who had got these Red Cross packages during the war, so it stuck with me. But he said, no, and the damage to the countryside and the cities was nothing compared to what they saw in Europe. There was some bombed out in Oslo, but in one of the other port cities, but other than that, he said it was usually pretty good. So I guess everybody back home thought the conditions were much worse, and I'm sure if you were in Norway, you agreed with them, but he thought they looked pretty good.
Thanks, Rob. And while the 99th was there, many of the men connected with their families, and there's pictures of families getting together. There's two brothers that hadn't seen each other in 3 years, and they were able to connect and so forth, so pretty amazing event. So, let's move on to any question about the 99? So let's move on to the OSS Norwegian Special Operations Group called NORSO. This is their badge, these are their parachutes. So the wings represent the parachute special forces. Just a word about OSS. The President organized the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, in 1942, collect and analyze strategic information, and directed by the Joint Chief for activities such as conduct sabotage in enemy and enemy-occupied countries, organize and conduct guerrilla warfare, support supply resistance groups. And so OSS is the forerunner of the CIA in terms of its intelligence and gathering and so forth. So this is the NORSO contingent as they're getting ready to leave Camp Hale. And they're all organized and lined up, and off they go. And this is a picture of a group of fellows headed for OSS. So this is Ryder John Grunset. He's a second lieutenant in this picture. When he dropped into France, he was the first lieutenant. He got a field promotion to captain. I'll explain that. So this is the NORSO group. Not all of them, but it's the two groups that were selected to go into France first. The gentleman in front is William Colby. Anybody heard of William Colby? He's a former CIA director. And he'll come into the picture, not the first part. I'll talk about Ryder John Grunset's drop. He was the first drop into France. And then Colby was in the group that went to Norway itself. So the idea was that the OSS NORSO groups would parachute into France and conduct, destroy bridges, rail lines, ambush German convoys, block passages, harass, capture, retreating Germans, because in 44 the Germans were retreating as well, and then provide reconnaissance and intelligence. The most important thing was that they connected with the Maquis, which is the French resistance, and highly organized, as you know, the French resistance. So here's my buddy John Grunset. His name is John Ryder Grunset. Okay. And his dad was big, and he's big, and but we grew up together, and he's my Norwegian soul brother. So when I visited him, he took me to the airfield that the OSS groups lifted off in England, and they all used B-24 Liberators. As Ralph said, they were dependent on the English to provide them with the airplanes. And we'll talk about some tragic crashes that happened on the operation in Norway. So here we're at a museum at Harrington Airfield that celebrates the NORSO soldiers that they worked with. So the first operation in France was called Percy Red. This was the first OSS drop into France. And as it turned out, this was an all Norwegian group. And it makes sense because the Norwegians were sort of shovel ready, so to speak. They were highly fit, highly skilled. They were very competent in special warfare, communications, tactics, and so forth. So I was led by Captain William F. Larson, had 18 men. It was the first NORSO group inserted by airdrops, arrived in July 31, and then were evacuated in 5 August. So they had quite a tour in central France, and I've got a map to show you where they were. So they wanted to be a trained military cadre to support the Maquis. So they were going to support them. They didn't want to take over their function. They wanted to coordinate with them. The most important thing was railway lines, a bridge, and then there's some mines that they wanted to knock out as well. And along the way, they discovered some pockets of Germans, and actually were able to capture a few and liberate a couple of villages. So here's the list of the participants, and here's Captain Larson, First Lieutenant Ryder Grunset, and then the rest of our Norwegian men participating in this airfield. This is the first OSS dropped into France. Here's a picture of the Percy Red group. There's Ryder Grunset there, and they're taking a break. And I don't think they were in any combat right at that point in time. And then this group clearly in the woods, under action. So the idea was to block highways and railways and destroy the mine, harass the Germans at every opportunity. They had 4 airplanes that took off for the area of France that they were headed for, but only one plane found a drop zone. That happened to be First Lieutenant Ryder Grunset's drop. And so he was in charge of the unit until the rest of the planes could arrive, and it took a couple more days to get there. Unfortunately, Captain Larson was subsequently killed by either a grenade or rifle fire, and he'd been there about 2 days. So Lieutenant Grunset then had to take over command of the group, and he was the first lieutenant at the time. He himself was slightly injured when he was in a withdrawal maneuver in early September. So this is a report that mentioned a couple of actions. First Lieutenant Grunset received information after an ambush that approximately 2,000 Germans were retreating. So the Maquis were not equipped to stop the withdrawal just in terms of personnel, so they decided to blow up a bridge to slow down their withdrawal. And the bridge was constructed with railway ties, which was really challenging to put the explosives and so forth. Took about an hour and a half to put the explosives, and they blew the bridge up with no casualties, no collateral damage to occupants, and it completely slowed down the 2,000 retreating and allowed the Maquis to capture 200 Germans in the garrison of Limoges. Now, as it turns out, at the completion of this work, the Maquis and Percy Red then went into the streets of this village and they became liberators. And so here's Limoges is how you say it. And then here's the coast, and Bordeaux is down here. So it's sort of a central, you can see the roads, and there's a vital location to capture. Since that day, Liberation Day, the citizens of Limoges have had an annual celebration, and Ryder Grunset went many, many years, and then he died, and John Grunset, my friend, is now going in honor of his father. And they've got a big celebration coming up in June. He's flying all his children and his grandchildren, and they're going to take over a hotel. And it's a wonderful relationship that will go on and on and on because of the citizens of this free village. Any questions about Percy Red and Ryder John Grunset?
Were they only Norwegians, there were no other, any other?
In this group, they're all from the Camp Hale group. All the Norwegian elites, yeah.
Were they all drawn from the 99th Infantry Battalion?
Yeah, they were all at Camp Hale.
Right.
And the OSS, head of OSS, Bill Donovan, said, hey, what's going on? They flew out there and they discovered all these specifically trained special forces men, and they had 80 enlisted and 12, and they took them back to Fort Snelling and then said, okay, they were in near Washington, D.C. So as a staging area, they said, okay, fine, you're in OSS. Then they moved them to England. So this first group was and it's quite a tribute to the training and conditioning and skill of the men that they were the first group of the OSS. And it's a legendary, OSS is legendary now, and their story isn't well told, but it's really quite an event. So this is Ripe, which is, they say it's a grouse, is a bird, right? Okay, okay, so that's, but everyone calls it ripe, I'm sorry, that's what it's called. So, what happened was, the missions in France, they had about 6 missions in France, and William Colby was pushing and pushing and pushing to get a Norso unit to go to Norway. And the idea was that as Germans were recognizing they were losing the war, then they've got Germans evacuating, and they could potentially escape Norway and go down through in Germany and form another, and then come back and continue to fight. So they wanted to find a way to interdict or interrupt the movement of the Germans in Norway. So Operation Ripe, Rupa, okay, Grouse sent 2 teams headed by Major William Colby. And the idea was they were up in a mountain area, and I've got a map to show you, and to interrupt the redeployment of German forces back to the continent. So unfortunately, this was a starstruck operation. There were several tragedies that happened. So Ralph mentioned the B-24s, and what happened was these were English pilots. And we had a presentation about this particular operation. The guy wrote a book, and his observation was that a lot of B-24 pilots are up here dropping bombs, but the B-24 for these missions were on the deck in bad weather, and they weren't trained for on the deck, number 1, and number 2, they really weren't trained for bad weather, and number 3, they certainly weren't trained for being on the deck in mountainous areas. So it was a prescription perhaps made for disaster, and they had 2 crashes. One crashed in Norway, the other airplane actually crashed in Orkney Island, and they lost 22 members of this operation group. Another airplane dropped the men and equipment in Sweden. He missed completely. And you know, and for them, they lost all the equipment, all the men in 2 planes, and then they're down another plane. So they only had 2 planes available, and as a result, they were short on men and short on supplies, and it really handicapped their ability to conduct their mission. They had harsh conditions. It's wintertime in the mountains. I'll show you. It's a little bit kind of northeast of Trondheim. And there were a lot of Germans up there. The Germans had a significant concentration of troops because they wanted to be on the northern border of Norway, because then that could interrupt in case Russia got involved and they decided to come around down through Finland and Sweden. And so they had a concentration of troops up there, and that was why they sent Ripa in there to prevent them from escaping. So they attacked some key north-south rail lines, and they were in constant attachment with the German 20th Army in the north. They coordinated the Norwegian resistance. So this all sounds, in spite of all their shortcomings, things should have worked pretty well. Well, Ralph mentioned the British, and Norway was their turf, and they didn't want the Americans to come in at the end of the war and start taking all the credit for liberating Norway, and they were really like the British sometimes tend to do. And what I learned was from John was that the British looked at the OSS units, and these Norwegians in particular, as amateurs. Well, folks, I mean, we got some highly trained men here, but what it was is they're officers, and they didn't have career military officers. They hadn't really been fully embedded into special warfare. So as a result, the British were dealing with the officers. Oh, these guys are a bunch of, they don't know what they're doing. And unfortunately, they had these highly trained men. So the Brits tried to sandbag them as much as they could. They parked them in Trondheim for a while, and then they finally were able to come out and go through Norway and connect with the families and go to Oslo. So it was the only U.S. operation in Norwegian soil, and it's famous in Norway. And they were really proud of these Norwegians that came over and spent time in their country, in their own native country. And they still celebrate RIPA, and so there's a task force RIPA in the Norwegian National Guard, which has adopted that name. So this is the mountainous area where they were dropped, and Trondheim's down here, so you can see sort of northeast. And then this is the mountainous area. There's a lake and a whole bunch of mountain area. So this was they sort of triangulated this whole area in their operations. And again, they were not just fighting the Germans, they were also fighting the British to get their things accomplished. And it was quite a challenge. And a tribute to William Colby, who, as much as he was ambitious, was also tenacious. And he wasn't going to put up with the Brits, and managed to get their mission accomplished. So this is the RIPA unit. Here's William Colby here. They had a small number of casualties. They had more wounded than killed in action. And then here they are. This is the RIPA unit getting ready to go on a reconnaissance mission. They used a farmhouse near the lake as their staging area. And here's William Colby after the surrender. And then here's the RIPA OSS Narso unit on a parade through Trondheim. And let's see, Colby is, that's Colby. So they were famous. The Norwegians loved it. This is set in July 1945, and you can imagine what a day, huh? So there's several books. There's only one book written about the OSS, Norwegian Special Operations Group. It was published in 1994. Part of the problem was because it was OSS, all that information was classified. And I think they have a 40-year rule. I think it's 40. And so John Brunseth couldn't find out what happened. They finally declassified everything, and this book came out when they finally declassified all that information. Is that right? It's 40 years, isn't it about? Something like that? Anyway, a long time. So their story was completely untold. And it's finally been able to come out, and we can celebrate it now. So there's a monument to the 99th and the OSS Norso group in Norway. It's on the western coast. A beautiful church, looks like the church my grandma went to. And there's a plaque celebrating both of the units, the 99th and the OSS Norso. And what I wanted to end with is that this was war. And these men gave themselves. So this is one cemetery in Normandy, and this is a man who is actually from Norway, and volunteered. He died when he's 34 years old, and he's buried in the cemetery not too far from Normandy. He's a corporal in the United States Army, assigned as an infanterist, Company D in the 99th Infantry Battalion. He was killed in action in the vicinity of France, and honored with a Purple Heart and Marksman Badge, American Campaign, Presidential Unit, and there he is, rest in peace. The men who died in the Battle of Bulge are actually buried in a different cemetery in Gettysburg. They brought them back, and they're buried in Gettysburg. So this is a 99th who's buried in Gettysburg, and he died in the Battle of Bulge. So as much as we celebrate these men and their heroism, we also have to remember the ones that didn't come back, and those are probably the most important of all. So, thank you.
Very
Any questions?
I just wonder how many other nationalities had their own
Well,
career
Ralph
flags.
said
So
that,
Germans, the Germans, sure.
Yeah.
Italians or French or.
yeah, what they did was, and I had at the beginning, and Ralph mentioned, so they decided to look at these cultural, ethnic groups of common language, and so they had Norwegians because of the possible invasion. They had some Italians, Japanese, Greeks, and then the Polish unit never took hold. And then of all of those, the Norwegian unit and the Japanese unit are the two that actually saw combat and proved their worth. And I mentioned the Japanese unit is the most decorated combat unit in World War II. It was the 442 or 422, I can't remember the exact number. There was a famous senator named Inouye, if you remember him, I forget his name, Daniel Inouye? Yeah, and so he was in the 442 and was wounded and so forth. So those are the two culture language groups that really participated.
I remember the code talkers.
Oh, yeah. Ralph's talking about the Navajo code talkers. The word for tank was turtle. I just remember that from the movie. Any other question?
Very good.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Very good.